Brethren, welcome. So today we're going to talk about leading effective Masonic discussions. Notice that I'm not saying we're talking about Masonic education, specifically talking about leading Masonic discussions, and hopefully that will make more sense later on in the presentation. This is one brother's idea. This is not based on anyone else's work. Snippets will come from other pieces of work, but these are just my opinions, so I'd really like to open up a discussion here. And being that we'd like to open up a discussion, please feel free to jump in anytime. You don't need to wait till the end to ask questions. If you have an observation or a comment or an objection, just throw it out there at any point. The first thing I want to talk about is VAK, or Visual, Auditory, and Kinesthetic Learning Styles. So this piece of work came from a presentation that Most Worshipful Brother Bill Cave did. I'd say I probably saw this 12 or 13 years ago. Most Worshipful Brother Cave was our Grand Master, I would say 12 or 13 years ago. Still very active in the craft and very involved in this type of education. This came from, so I'm going to do a very condensed version of a larger presentation that he did. So the VAK style, as I said, speaks to visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And it speaks to learning styles. So every individual has a different learning style. Someone who's visual learns by observing things. So they're going to want to see pictures. They're going to want to see diagrams, demonstrations, handouts, displays, that sort of thing. That's how that person learns. Someone who's auditory obviously learns by hearing. They want to hear spoken word, or they might learn from music, something that they're hearing. So that person is going to react very well to being spoken to or being lectured to. And someone who has a kinesthetic learning style, that's a doer. That's a person who's going to learn by a physical experience. So touching, feeling, holding, practical hands-on stuff. So I just want to ask a question here. Think about those things: hearing, seeing, touching, doing. What do you think your personal learning style is? Anybody? Jerry?
Visual and kinesthetic. I got to be able to do it.
Visual and kinesthetic.
Is it fair to ask a musician? All the above.
Yeah.
All the above.
Okay.
Very relaxing.
Douglas?
Visual kinesthetic. I got it. You can talk to me till the sun comes home.
How's that worked in your marriage?
43 years.
Okay. So this little piece you see over here, obviously you can't read it, but what it says is VAK Learning Style Self-Assessment Questionnaire. There's a 30-page questionnaire that we could all go through, and it will give us an idea what our individual learning styles are. Now, we're not going to do that today because it'll take far too long. It might actually be another piece for another education or discussion. What does all this mean? People will have a blend of learning styles. You're not going to be one or the other. Typically, people will have two different learning styles which will be more dominant, and the other one, when we do the test, will fall down sort of to the bottom. So you might be equal in all three, but typically someone's more dominant in two, with the third one being being quite distant. So these are generalizations, and that's why the title is Gross Generalizations. We're speaking about people in general. Men tend to have kinesthetic as one of their two dominant. And ladies tend to have auditory as one of their two dominant. You might not listen to you. So what does this mean? Once again, these are gross generalizations. But if you're in a Masonic lodge, you probably want to be doing something in your education. Whereas perhaps if you're in an Eastern Star meeting, auditory might be the way to go. Gross generalizations, but it's just an example of how people learn, and particularly how a lot of men learn. We like to do things. So, something, sorry, go ahead.
So, the idea of having a practice, having the parts run through, is a much better idea if you're kinesthetic. You're learning by doing.
Yeah.
You're also using vision.
Yeah.
And Will, just when you're going through degrees, just having a steps practice where nobody says anything, just walking through it has been invaluable.
Okay. So we're already doing this in lodge, and do we do this because that's how we learn, or I don't know, but it works.
Because it's the way we do things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've always done that.
Ah, exactly.
Okay, let's move on. I'm losing the crowd. And I talked earlier on about education and discussion. So whenever we're planning a piece, I think we really need to get into a mindset of what are we trying to achieve? What are we aiming for? So we always start out by doing research. But research is kind of what you do sitting at home by the fire with a dram of whiskey when you're looking at a centuries-old Masonic text or online or what have you. That's the research portion. That's not education. You're educating yourself and you're getting ready to do education. I'm not here to talk about research or how to research Masonic topics. There's 1,000 different resources out there. Probably any man in this room could put his finger on hundreds of resources in 20 minutes or 3 clicks of the mouse. So we're starting with research, and hopefully we're moving on to education. We're taking something back to the lodge. So at the end of the presentation, at the end of the meeting, you can ask yourself, did I educate someone today? And if you did, that's great. But in my opinion, that's really only a score of about 50 out of 100. You're not there yet. The magic moment happens when you get to discussion. So think about events you've been to. Where the effective ones are usually ones where we've entered into discussion. So Andrew, I'd like to educate you to turn your phone off. Yeah. No worries. So when we're educating, and education is great, but that's me as a speaker educating you. When we get down to that magic point discussion, that's when everyone's talking, that's when we're educating each other. That's not one man's opinion, that's educating each other. And that's the real sweet point. And that's why this presentation is called Leading Effective Discussion rather than Delivering Effective Education. Okay. Questions?
So where does listening come into the format here?
Well, if
Like in the third one?
well, education, I mean, you would listen to either education or discussion. Okay, so here's where I want to get the group going. I want to get some discussion going. Active and involved discussion, tips and tricks. How do we do it? I've been to a lot of education sessions where I've sat in lodge and have someone talk to me. Has it ever been exciting? The answer is normally not. Okay. So, tips and tricks. Go to refreshment, which we did today. Quite often we don't do that. We just have a guy stand up here in the East and talk. And that doesn't stimulate discussion because a Masonic lodge in a formal setting is not designed to stimulate discussion. And I'll argue that with anybody. Move people around, which we did today. We needed to because we had the slide. But quite often if we have someone presenting, we'll move them to one side of the room. And yeah, it's to get a better view of what's going on, but you're also getting people out of the role. So move around, get active. And engage and demonstrate. So we talked about the kinesthetic style. Demonstrate and ask for participation. Some other tips: use props and displays. I'm just going to use examples here. Pat Prefontaine did a presentation at our last meeting, and it was regarding the 47th proposition of Euclid. Now, he could have explained the 47th proposition of Euclid. We've all seen it. We know what it looks like. But he just did something as simple as drew it. He used a display. It wasn't hard. But then he was able to talk about the equilateral triangle, point it out, and it makes more sense because you're hearing, you're also seeing. You're using at least two of the VAKs. Don't read someone else's work. We see this all the time. I can research any piece and I can stand up and read it to you, but that's not me talking, so it doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound like I'm delivering a piece of education. You can email me that, I'll read it at home, and I'll read it a hell of a lot better than whoever's reading it up there. Take the work and put it in your own words. As an example, I referenced some work that I borrowed from Bill Cave. I talked to Bill a couple of weeks ago, and he gave me all of his slides and documents. Bill's a very formal guy. I went through that 2 or 3 times, and I couldn't convince myself the way I was saying it in Bill's voice. I changed it up. I just reworded it. About 6 months ago, 2 beers, phone number 2. About 6 or 8 months ago, I did a presentation that had been done by Most Worshipful Brother Isaac Brower Berkoven, who's actually a member of this lodge, believe it or not. And it's a piece of work I'd seen 18 years ago. I absolutely loved it, stuck with me. I always wanted to do it. He sent it to me. I went through it. I learned it inside and out, but I couldn't do it in his text. Had to change it. So change it, make it natural to yourself. And allow for and stimulate conversation. Someone disagreeing with you is good. It means they're listening. It means they're thinking about what you're talking about. So here's where I want to go back to the group. And I'm looking for some answers. Think about presentations you've seen over the past 2 or 3 years. What interesting techniques have been used to make those efficient? Anybody?
No monotone, speaking in a different tone of voice for every sentence, and that way everybody is listening intently, rather than listening to some guy drone on and on. You soon lose attention.
So don't sound like a high school teacher.
Exactly.
And that kind of goes to putting it in your own words. You're going to be more. You don't need to be animated, but you're going to be more animated, and it's going to be more natural if you're using your own words. Sorry, Scott.
When I did the senior warden's lecture, in the 80s, I drone on standing at my station, whereas Right Worshipful Gibbons gets up and walks around the room, and does a little drama and uses props, and I think that works far superior than me droning on the pulpit, whereas he asks questions. We do presentations, we ask others to questions as to what they've actually heard. I mean, I wouldn't want to give much credit.
Credit where credit's due. Mike's a fantastic ritualist. Sorry, David.
Yeah, so another technique is move through the room while you're doing it.
Yep.
Close to people, engage them, look at them, modulate your voice while you're doing it, develop an intimate connection. Different people, attitudes.
It's like doing a good piece of ritual. It's magical when it gets to the point where you're telling a buddy a story, right? Mr. Constable, Brother Constable.
Very guilty at times of taking the lectures and interspersing my own editorial comments on that to help the candidates through it.
Really, I've never seen that.
Anyway, I just wondered what the general opinion of the meeting was, because I'm following the lecture, but I'm just interspersing, explaining something that written in 1700s English may go right over the candidate's head.
Well, you know, as you say the word, if it doesn't make sense to you as the person presenting it, then paraphrase it in such a way that, yes, okay, you're getting the words through and the thoughts through to who's receiving it. Or senior warden's lecture in the entered apprentice degree. There's a perfect opportunity in there near the end of it where you have somebody standing at the rough ashlar with their feet forming the right angle of an oblong square. And you can get somebody to kneel at the altar in the position that they took their obligation. The candidates can see that, and it's more visual, and because they're not going to remember it from when they went through it. There's just too much information thrown at them through a fire hose.
Yeah, no, in addition to using that as a framework, I found very effective. Well, I don't know if the guys listening to it have.
I think Grand Lodge needs to allow more liberty for lectures such as yourself.
And incentives.
And yes, and too.
And
But I think we could do a lot better.
And to your point, Greg, you did a lecture a few years ago in the third degree. It's one that I'd given a number of times, and occasionally there's a word you don't really know, you just memorize it and you keep going. And the word was deputed. And you stopped. You stopped and you explained that essentially that means deputized. I'd given the lecture 4 times. I didn't know that. So
I know, yeah,
there's value.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And one other point to that, Will. Last June, I had a chance to talk to our present Grand Master about large classes of candidates. And yes, it's great. You do large classes of candidates, but are they getting out of it what they should be getting out of it? Because it's one candidate, the focus on everything is on that one candidate. If you've got multiple candidates, are you watering down their experience by doing multiple candidates? So what are you going to do to ensure that every candidate is getting something unique out of it? So we're trying to, instead of addressing them as brethren, brother so-and-so and brother so-and-so and brother so-and-so, this is what's going to happen, instead of brethren. But intersperse a uniqueness to it, so they have a unique experience.
You did it further. You had lodge brethren take particular roles during the actual lecture, so there was some hands-on versus.
Yeah.
If you can do it individual, do it individual. But there's some things you can't.
Okay. I'm trying to stimulate discussion, but I'm going to move on and take control here. Who know? How can you tell Mike's retired now? My God. See, Mike, I'm sorry. Mike and I have been friends for years. I'm just giving him the gears. So after, let's call it education, call it discussion. Afterwards, how do you know you've been successful? So when you're giving the lecture, watch when you're giving the lecture and think afterwards, were guys watching me? Or were they watching the wall or doing something else? I haven't been a Freemason for that long. I don't know, 20 or 25 years, somewhere around there. But a few years into my career, I did probably my first lecture. I'm just going to demonstrate. Brother sitting over there actually had his handkerchief out, polishing his shoe. That's when I knew I lost him. So knew I wasn't super successful, needed to get better at what I was doing. I think I just sat down mid-lecture in that one and quit, but brethren aren't engaged. Are you asking the brethren questions throughout in order to engage them? And more importantly, are they asking you questions or each other questions to engage? That's when you know you've been successful. And afterwards, did you give them an opportunity, and did they take the opportunity to discuss and express opinions? Remember back to slide 1, I said, this is just one guy's opinion, not AI generated. It's not necessarily right. I just want to start a discussion on education and discussions within Lodge. So what I'm telling you might not be right. I want you guys to tell me what you think. That's the magic point. We'll talk a little bit about picking Masonic topics. So obviously we want to talk about something that's interesting to everyone in the Lodge. Otherwise, why would they come? Freemasonry is the obvious one because we're all Freemasons. Obviously, we're interested. And that's the topic we tend to go to. And that's fine. Could be Masonic history, esoteric. Could be discussing an individual piece of degree work and discussing amongst the brethren what that piece means. Mike Gibbons did a very lovely piece about 10 years ago where he dissected the address to the brethren which is given at the installation of officers. Very well received and very well done. I helped, but it was Mike's work. So no endless possibilities. I mean, we could do 1,000 pieces of work on Masonic history, and I mean, I could email you 1,000 tomorrow. But many of us have interests outside of the craft. I'm looking around the room here, and for the most part, I'm seeing middle-aged to older gentlemen. That's not a great situation, but I mean, today we're playing the hand we're dealt with. So we've got other interests. Men's health, prostate cancer that's gone through our lodges like crazy. I'm really interested in retirement planning because I'm 54 years old.
What?
And I don't have a teacher's pension.
You're still a baby.
You keep popping out with them, Greg. I'm going to come back at you.
That's okay. You see, I got everybody to laugh, Will,
Yeah.
so they're paying
Good
attention,
stuff.
right?
So they're laughing at you.
I know, I don't care.
Wills and estates. Mental health. I'm a stressed out guy. I work pretty hard. I'd love to know some relaxation techniques that aren't going to make me do yoga and bend in ways I can't bend. So there's a lot of common interests outside of the lodge, and there's brethren who can help out. We've got lawyers who can talk about will and estate planning. We've got financial planners who can talk about retirement, tax savings tips when you're going into retirement. We have these guys in the lodge. We don't need to talk about Masonic stuff every time. There are other options. And I've seen a few really good occasions where we had a non-Masonic topic by a non-Masonic speaker. So we've actually pulled somebody in who knew about a topic. We went to refreshment and they educated us for half an hour. Now, it's also nice if you can pick a male non-Masonic speaker who you think would make a good lodge member, but that's secondary. So, what non-Masonic topics would you guys like to hear about?
Sometimes from a brother's personal experiences, like just a story from his life. I know that in my lodge, before I joined, they used to go around the room and have one person kind of give them a short biography, but they'd all heard each other's stories. So after I joined, I didn't get to hear any of those bios. And you find out that the guy next to you has worked on the Avro Arrow or something like that, and it's like, wow, I want to hear that story.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Some of the Rotary clubs do that, and it's called the 5-minute bio or something. Or I've seen it done before. And we actually, so this lodge is a consolidation of two different lodges, one of them being the former Selkirk Lodge. And when I joined Selkirk Lodge, the master at the time, Sandy Marshall, started doing that. And we did that, well, there's probably about 12 or 14 active guys. So we did it for about a year and a half. And in Kimberley, you think every old guy is a miner. Well, no, that's not the case. Mike and I just talked about this. If you want to hear a bio, you guys know Ron Waugh? That guy's done stuff you wouldn't imagine.
Come to International Day, you'll hear super impressive.
Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily need to be Masonic, although we all like Masonic topics, they're fun. Quite often when we're going into Masonic Lodge education, we don't know what the education is going to be, and that's fine. We're surprised. But what if we gave advance notice in either in our notices or in a meeting before the previous lodge meeting? Next month, we're going to talk about whatever. If it's in the notice, an interesting topic could draw visitors and could draw your own members, as opposed to simply saying education, which the secretary often puts them in the notice. And I can say that because I'm the secretary, and the notice gets done late, and I just put education without giving it any thought. The few occasions where I put education and given the topic and who's going to speak, guys have told me they really appreciate that. They like to know what they're getting into. And it could give an opportunity to have the guys come prepared to talk about whatever the topic is. So I'll just give an example, and this is not what I've done, but it's what I'd like to do. We use the term fidelity a lot in Lodge. Fidelity, 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 a number of different places. This conversation for an education piece came out of a Masonic road trip. I can't remember who I was driving with, but the topic of fidelity came up, and we realized we all kind of had different opinions of what fidelity was. So I've always considered asking the guys to come to Lodge prepared to talk about what fidelity means to you. So if I ask you guys now on the spot, you could get lost, you might not want to talk, you haven't given it a lot of thought. You had a couple weeks to think about it. You might come up with some different stuff. My mind on fidelity automatically goes to marital fidelity. I don't know why, it just does. But for other guys, it could mean things like general loyalty to any one use, or I'm going to read this. An actual definition I found was fidelity is a degree of compliance to an original source document. Is that what we're talking about in Lodge? I don't know. I'd like to talk about it with the guys. So fidelity and fealty, another word that we use in Lodge quite often, come from the Greek word fidelis, meaning faithful or loyal. So that kind of discussion can go a number of different ways. It's going to be much more fruitful if the guys come prepared to talk about it, if they've given it some thought. So the point I'm trying to make is not that fidelity would make a good conversation in Lodge, although I think it would. It's that brethren are going to have a better discussion if they come prepared to talk. And notice that I said discussion again instead of the old word of education. Okay, so we're wrapping up here. I'm going 25 minutes. That's what I expected. This is my last slide. It's the close and it's the challenge. So we've got about, let's say 15 guys in the room here. So the challenge is spend the next 2 months working on a new piece of education or discussion. And then whenever you're done with that, call all the masters or the secretaries in your district. You're probably going to do it in your own lodge first. Call all the masters and the secretaries and let them know you did this piece and you're offering it to do it in their lodge sometime over the next year. And then next year, do it again. We've got 15 guys here. We can generate 15 different presentations, done twice, 30 different lodge presentations in 2 districts that, I'm sorry to offend, really sometimes have a hard time coming up with a reason to be relevant to their members. So that's the challenge. And Kootenay Lodge of Education and Research, absolutely applaud what you guys do. I'd probably be a member if I had the time, but I think you guys are going to generate some good stuff. But we have the opportunity here as well to show the brethren how we can do it. David.
So a question about traveling and so on. I'm fairly new. I've only been a Mason for 5 or 6 years. Would that be something normally that you would do in the good of the craft, for example? How long is the longest presentation you would want to create if you're traveling? I'm just curious about the formatting and procedure.
I think you would ask the worshipful master how much time they would allot you. Now, a lot of lodges have education as a regular order of business, and under the Grand Lodge template bylaws, it's actually recommended that education, hate the word, discussion is the 3rd order of business. And I think the reason there is that you're getting the guys before they've been sitting down for an hour and get too tired. Yeah, but actually that would be a question to discuss with the master of that lodge to see just how much time they want to give you and what facilities they have. Do they have a projector? Blah, blah, blah.
With the Lodge of Education, I've definitely found that most of the interest, most of the people joining are wanting to receive education. You know, they're really interested in being receptive. And so it's really hard to find people who want to actually write a paper and present it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, with a large couple of districts, but sparse population compared to the Lower Mainland, we'll have to bring in guest speakers a lot of the time. But that's definitely a goal of the Lodge of Education, to encourage people, like you've just done, to write their own pieces.
Nice.
Anybody can, you know.
Yeah.
We all have stuff we know about. And keyboard.
And actually, that's a really good point, Tyler. And a lot of people, when discussing, thinking about education or discussions or education, tend to start doing research in centuries-old volumes that were written by academics. And my God, I could never duplicate that. I'm not going to try. It doesn't need to be like that. You don't need to be the expert. You're the facilitator. Okay. Any more thoughts or questions?
Well, that last point was a neat one, because if you pick a topic that you know a lot of the brethren know a lot about, then you can solicit input from people who might have a large depth of knowledge.
Yeah. Oh, someone always knows more than you, and that's great.
So
Scott?
is there any lodges out there that haven't had the pleasure of seeing the ancient work? So when you take a candidate around the floor, and there's lots going on, and there's lots to know, is there any way that you could go to a refreshment after you've gone through your presentation and move the person forward and actually said, okay, now let's review step one. Why are we doing step one? And you know, you were saying yourself that a lot of people join the Board of Education because they want to educate. Well, I'm one person that really needs an education. And, there's so much to know about what is inside this room, why it's there, why we're doing it. But I don't really know if, in my case, if I could honestly say that it was ever explained properly. It's shown, you're shown, and you walk through, and this is what you do when you're an apprentice. But just sit down and say, well,
So Scott, if I can answer that, I mean, anyone could answer, but I'm standing up, so I kind of figure I need to. A couple of different ways that could happen. So in the entered apprentice degree, I've actually seen my mother lodge did it, but we call it the pajama lecture, where a guy comes in dressed as an entered apprentice and explains all of the things he just went through. And it's not a piece of ritual that you find in the ritual book, but it's just been around long enough that we could find it. So that's specifically to the entered apprentice degree. The other things you're talking about, Scott, I mean, they could be done in lodge. That's also stuff that we really should be doing with candidates between the degrees. So, you know what, you went through the degree, this is what you did formally, let's talk about what it means. And there's a bunch of different resources out there. And Scott, I'm embarrassed. I was there when you were raised, and if what would have been, I don't know if it was Cranbrook or Fisher Peak Lodge at the time, didn't do that, then our lodge or the lodge dropped the ball. There's ways to do that.
I don't think the lodge really dropped the ball. But I'll share my story. I was given a book, and the book basically explains what's going on. But from your lecture, I don't learn that way. I learn from, take me over to that corner, explain to me this piece is this piece is that, this is why it's a, you know, a sign symbol, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And like when you give someone this is the person that's mentoring that person that's going through, it takes a lot of time. So I'm not saying anything was done wrong.
Yeah.
I'm saying that myself, I don't attend lodge enough. And there's not enough time spent educating on the basic, raising of a master mason.
Yeah.
I think there's a really good point there, because I was going to bring up, like, Castle would do the ancient work, and it's the junior warden and senior warden lectures are such long pieces that they're rarely performed anymore. But I always give them to a new entered apprentice to read afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody were to read that out in lodge and be demonstrating and pointing things out, that's going to stick way more.
Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily need to be the night of the degree. Maybe it's the next meeting where you come out, let's do an explanation.
It's probably better that it not be the night of
the
degree.
Actually, thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. Greg.
The only other suggestion I would have on presenting something is if you want to do the full works or just a little piece, keep it short and sweet. Andrew, I hope I'm not walking on your notes, but we were going to do concordant bodies, York Rite things, and we decided instead of doing 7 or 8 different ones, we're going to narrow it down to just 3 for this meeting, and that way it's easier to maintain attention span.
Yeah. Scott.
The other thing, people live usually, when someone does a lecture that's written, what stops that person from giving it to their lodge secretary, and that lodge secretary turn it into someone who provides the library for those type of lectures. Grand Lodge sort of has some of it on their site. It's very limited. And it could be better, but we can contribute to that library with our own individual lectures. Like what you did there should get filed somewhere as a resource. It's a good lecture. And
No.
we can make things a lot simpler without copying it, without reinventing the wheel.
Yeah. So I apologize, Scott. I just tried to speak over you.
Okay.
Which.
I'm used to you.
So are you talking about filing the resource or filing that, Will Nixon can do this lecture for somebody?
No,
We're both.
I'm just saying Will Nixon can.
Yeah.
Is that here's a lecture that Will Nixon, let's just stand up. Here's a lecture that Will Nixon did. So it was a great lecture. We learned by it, and here you go, secretary. Now send it out to the other secretaries or create a library of lectures that other people have had. And Tyler could take your lecture and could make it better, or one of mine. I did a shitty lecture the other day. Okay, I talked about science. Remember, it was horrible. Symbology of an Oreo cookie. But you know what I did wrong?
Didn't hand out Oreo cookies?
That's what I handed out. Right? I handed out Oreo cookies. But you know what I did wrong? It was somebody else's words.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. I should have been eating Oreo cookie and throwing them at the guys who were, but I could have done it better. Mike says, we're going to lose everybody. You know what? I lost everybody. I tried to bring him back by asking people questions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they were way long gone. And it was way too long. It was 22 pages, double spaced, size 20 font.
Size 11 font.
Why it was not? It was 40. It was 20. but I did exactly some of the things that I should have been doing. So, like I said, stepping down here, talking, really, it works way better. We did, in trail when we had those discussions in trail. When people stood down the floor and talked, it was I think it was better received than it was the guy that stood behind an altar.
And,
or podium or whatever you call it.
and if the presentation is actually a paper that's been written, then to your point, Scott, like having that archived for everybody who wasn't there to be able to find is one thing that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you gave away.
They're still going to miss the discussion part. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, guys, I'm going to wrap up. We've got a few different presentations to do today. So thanks very much. I started working on this about 3 months ago when I offered, and then I actually started working on it about a week ago when I remembered. And these things take time and commitment. I've been percolating for quite some time, as I tend to do before I put fingers to keyboard. But something like this is legitimately 10 hours worth of time. So where it's easier to just read someone else's work, but not effective.
When Scott was talking about his Oreo cookies.
We don't have any cookies.
No,
Just throw home my car.
Thanks.
It was a good lecture. He put himself down. It was a little long because the way it's written, I could have shown it. But
Does anyone else
it was a
need
good
this?
lecture. It was neat. It was funny and it was enjoyable. So kudos to Scott.
Don't put yourself down, Scott.
So on that note.
I'll just get cleaned up here.